You see, there comes a moment in every connection where silence speaks louder than any message you could send. When you finally stop chasing, stop explaining, stop justifying your worth, something powerful happens. The avoidant, who once pulled away every time you got close, begins to feel the absence of your energy. They start to notice that the air feels different without you in it. For the longest time, they thought your love was just there, an open door they could walk in and out of whenever it suited them. They took your consistency for granted, mistaking your kindness for weakness and your patience for permission. But when you finally walk away, not to punish, but to protect your peace, the dynamic shifts. At first, they'll pretend it doesn't matter. They'll convince themselves that distance is what they wanted. They'll scroll past your name, maybe even tell themselves they're fine. But the truth, they'll feel that ache in moments they least expect, when they wake up and reach for their phone out of habit. When they hear that song you both loved, when they try to share a small victory and realize you're no longer the person who cheers them on, the absence of your presence becomes the loudest sound in their life. And that's when the realization hits that losing you wasn't just losing a person, it was losing peace, safety, and love without performance. But here's the twist. By the time they truly understand what they've lost, you're no longer standing in the same place. You've grown. You've learned that love isn't about waiting for someone to choose you, it's about choosing yourself when they can't meet you halfway. You no longer beg for closure, because your healing became your closure. You stopped romanticizing potential and started honoring reality. When the avoidant realizes they've truly lost you, they finally see the gravity of what they pushed away, the kind of love that was steady, warm, and real. But this realization doesn't belong to you anymore. It's their lesson to carry, not your responsibility to fix. So if you're in that space where someone is just now realizing your worth after you've already walked away, take a breath and smile. That's not rejection, that's redirection. You didn't lose them, you found you. Absence speaks louder than words, especially when love has been stretched thin by misunderstanding, fear, and emotional distance. There comes a time when no amount of explaining, pleading, or trying to fix things can make someone understand your value the way silence can. When you stop showing up to prove your love, when you stop reaching out to repair what someone keeps breaking, something powerful begins to happen. Silence becomes your strongest voice, and absence becomes your greatest teacher. In relationships with avoidant partners, words often lose their meaning because avoidants thrive on emotional control and distance. They fear too much closeness, yet they crave the warmth of connection. When you were present, they may have brushed off your affection or minimized your importance, not because they didn't care, but because closeness felt threatening to them. Your consistent presence made them feel both comforted and cornered. They grew accustomed to your energy always being there to catch them when they fell, to reassure them when they pulled away, to love them even when they weren't ready to reciprocate. But the moment you stop filling that space, they begin to notice the void. It starts quietly. Maybe they notice fewer messages, fewer check-ins, fewer moments where your name lights up their screen. At first, they may feel relief, a temporary sense of freedom. But that relief slowly morphs into unease. They start to realize that the emotional safety net they once took for granted is no longer there. The absence of your presence becomes a mirror reflecting back to them what they lost. It shows them how much space you actually occupied in their emotional world, even if they never admitted it. Silence is uncomfortable for someone who once relied on your emotional availability. It forces them to confront their own fears and insecurities without the distraction of your reassurance. They may try to fill that silence with other people, with work, or with distractions, but nothing quite replaces the steadiness of your presence. It's in the quiet moments, late at night or in between their daily routines, that the weight of your absence becomes undeniable. Your absence speaks not in anger, but in clarity. It communicates boundaries without needing confrontation. It says, I will no longer participate in my own neglect. It shifts the dynamic entirely. Where your words once sought to convince, your silence now commands respect. Where your efforts once begged for recognition, your absence now demands reflection. And what's beautiful about this transformation is that the message your silence sends isn't for them, it's for you. It reminds you that you don't have to over-explain to be understood. You don't have to chase to be chosen. The energy you once poured into trying to make someone see your worth can now be redirected toward yourself. When the avoidant finally realizes what your silence truly means, it hits them deeply because it signifies something final, that your love is no longer a guarantee. They begin to understand that silence isn't indifference, it's acceptance. Acceptance that you can love someone deeply and still choose to walk away when that love isn't valued. In the end, absence doesn't just show them what they lost, it shows you what you gained: peace, power, and the freedom to love without losing yourself. The shift of power happens in detachment, not in arguments, not in proving a point, and not in waiting for the other person to change. True power begins the moment you stop chasing validation and start reclaiming your emotional energy. In relationships with avoidant partners, the balance of power often tilts toward the one who seems less invested, less affected, less vulnerable. The avoidant thrives on control, the ability to pull back when things get intense, to withdraw when closeness feels overwhelming, and to decide the rhythm of connection. For a long time, you might have played along without realizing it, adjusting your emotions to match their comfort level, silencing your needs to keep the peace, and softening your truth just to maintain their presence. But the real turning point comes when you decide to detach, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to control what isn't yours to control. You stop overanalyzing every text, every silence, every mixed signal. You stop giving your energy to confusion. You stop performing emotional gymnastics to earn love that should have been freely given. When you detach, you reclaim the emotional leverage that was quietly taken from you through inconsistency and avoidance. The avoidant begins to feel something unfamiliar, a shift in the dynamic they once controlled. They sense that your attention, which used to orbit around them, is now centered on yourself. That's when they start to notice your absence, not just physically, but energetically. Power in relationships isn't about dominance, it's about emotional equilibrium. When you're attached to someone who avoids intimacy, your emotions often become reactive to their behavior. Their silence hurts, their distance triggers you, their return feels like relief. You start living in emotional extremes, high when they engage, low when they withdraw. But detachment restores your internal balance. It allows you to observe without obsessing, to respond without reacting, and to care without clinging. You start to move differently, think differently, and show up differently. You begin to make peace with uncertainty instead of fearing it. For the avoidant, this shift feels like losing control. They were used to being the one who set the tone, pulling back and knowing you'd always come closer. But when you stop chasing, their distance no longer gives them comfort. It gives them anxiety. They start wondering if they miscalculated, if they pushed too far, if they mistook your patience for permanence. The very detachment that empowers you becomes the wake-up call they never saw coming. The beauty of detachment lies in its quiet strength. You don't need to announce it or prove it. You simply embody it. Your calm becomes your message. Your focus becomes your boundary. And that energy, that quiet, confident energy, is magnetic. You're no longer trying to win someone over. You're walking in your worth. The power you once gave away through fear and overgiving returns to you through stillness and self-trust. That's when the avoidant begins to realize that the person who once needed them has become the person they can no longer reach. Avoidants feel the loss in the quiet moments, not immediately after you walk away, but slowly, like an echo that grows louder over time. When you were there, they may have taken your presence for granted. They thought your warmth, your understanding, your emotional availability would always be there, waiting for them to return whenever they needed comfort. But the truth is, it's not the moment of separation that truly impacts them. It's the small, silent moments that come afterward, the spaces where you used to exist and no longer do. Those are the moments that make them realize that something meaningful has truly gone. At first, they might convince themselves that your absence is a relief. Avoidants often see emotional distance as safety. They tell themselves that space is what they need, that disconnection is a form of peace. But human connection doesn't disappear just because someone tries to suppress it. They might throw themselves into distractions, work, social life, hobbies, or even new people to avoid facing what they feel. Yet, no matter how much they try to fill the void, your presence lingers in subtle, powerful ways. It shows up when they wake up and instinctively reach for their phone, expecting your message. It surfaces when they come across a song you both loved, or a place you used to visit together. These small, unexpected reminders are what truly break through their emotional defenses. Avoidants are not immune to emotion. They are just skilled at delaying it. They suppress vulnerability because it makes them feel exposed, and they fear dependency because it makes them feel powerless. But when you're gone, not pretending to be gone, but truly gone, they lose the emotional anchor that kept their world stable. You were the steady presence that tolerated their distance, the safe place they could always return to when the world felt too heavy. When that safety disappears, the silence becomes deafening. It's no longer the comforting silence they once used to escape emotional intensity. It becomes a reminder of what they've pushed away. The loss hits them in fragments. It's not one big realization, but a series of small awakenings. Maybe it's when they see your name somewhere and feel that familiar ache. Maybe it's when something good happens and they instinctively want to share it with you, only to remember they can't. These moments build quietly, forming an emotional storm that they can no longer ignore. And the irony is, by the time they start feeling the weight of it, you've already begun to heal. You're no longer standing still, waiting for their recognition. You've grown stronger, clearer, more at peace. Avoidants often learn through loss, not through conversation. It's only when your absence becomes undeniable that they realize the depth of what they had. And while their realization may come too late to restore the relationship, it serves as a silent acknowledgement of your impact. You may have left their life, but your presence remains in the lessons. They'll carry forward lessons about love, connection, and the cost of pushing away someone who only wanted to love them. Growth replaces grief when you finally stop waiting for someone to see your worth and start focusing on becoming the person you were always meant to be. At first, the pain of losing someone you deeply cared for feels unbearable. You replay memories, you question what you could have done differently, and you hold on to hope that maybe one day they'll come back realizing what they lost. But over time, something shifts. The tears you once shed out of sadness turn into clarity. You begin to understand that their distance was never a reflection of your inadequacy, but a mirror of their inability to connect. The same moments that once felt like rejection now become opportunities for redirection. Slowly, you realize that grief was simply the first stage of transformation. When you're attached to someone who constantly avoids emotional intimacy, you start to lose pieces of yourself trying to hold the connection together. You overextend, overthink, and overgive. But when you finally let go, you start reclaiming those lost parts. Every boundary you set becomes an act of healing. Every time you resist the urge to reach out, you build emotional muscle, and one day you wake up and realize that the ache that once consumed you has softened. It's not that you've forgotten them, it's that you've grown beyond the need for their validation. Growth is quiet at first. It shows up in small ways, like when you stop checking your phone every few minutes, or when you hear their name and no longer feel your heart race. It's when you start finding joy in your own company again, or when you rediscover things you used to love before the relationship consumed your identity. What used to be grief now becomes gratitude for the lesson, for the strength you didn't know you had, and for the chance to rebuild yourself without the constant anxiety of being abandoned. For the avoidant, this is often the moment they start noticing the change in you. They sense your emotional distance, but this time it's not coldness, it's calm. You're no longer trying to fix what's broken. You're simply living, thriving, and evolving, and that's when they truly feel the loss. They see that the person who once centered their world around them has found peace elsewhere. They realize too late that your detachment isn't about bitterness, it's about healing. By the time the avoidant finally wakes up to what they lost, you've already outgrown the version of yourself that would have settled for less. You've learned to love without losing yourself, to give without expecting, and to walk away without resentment. Your healing becomes your closure. The love you once poured into them now flows back into your own growth, your dreams, and your peace. And in that transformation, you find the kind of strength that no heartbreak can ever take away. Their lesson, your liberation, that's what happens when the avoidant finally realizes what they've lost, and you finally realize what you've gained. For a long time, you might have carried the weight of their emotional unavailability, thinking that if you just loved them harder, if you just understood them better, they would eventually meet you halfway. You tried to bridge the gap between their fear of closeness and your desire for connection, but every time you reached out, they pulled back. Every time you tried to understand, they built another wall. What you didn't see then was that this dynamic was never yours to fix, it was theirs to face. And once you stopped trying to rescue them from themselves, you set yourself free. Avoidants often have to lose something real before they truly begin to understand the consequences of their behavior. They run from love thinking it's suffocating, only to realize that it's the very thing that made them feel alive. When you leave, they lose not just your presence, but the emotional safety that came with it, the warmth, the reassurance, the stability. But here's the truth, their realization, as powerful as it may be, doesn't belong to you anymore. It's not your role to be there when they finally wake up. Their lesson is to face the emptiness their avoidance created, to understand that connection can't exist where fear dictates every move. For you, this becomes liberation. You stop carrying the emotional labor of trying to heal someone who refuses to heal themselves. You stop confusing patience with self-abandonment. You stop shrinking yourself just to fit into the narrow space they were willing to offer. When you finally accept that their growth is not your responsibility, you reclaim your energy, your confidence, and your peace. You begin to see that closure doesn't come from their apology, it comes from your acceptance. You no longer need them to validate your worth because your healing has already done that. There's something deeply empowering about watching yourself rise from a place that once broke you. You look back and realize that the pain had a purpose. It taught you boundaries, self-respect, and emotional independence. You start loving yourself with the same devotion you once gave them. You stop chasing potential and start honoring reality. And that shift, that deep internal shift, is the moment liberation becomes real. When the avoidant realizes what they've lost, they may come back with regret, confusion, or longing. But you'll no longer be waiting in the same emotional place. You'll listen with compassion, but from a distance. Because their awakening is not an invitation for you to return, its confirmation that walking away was the right choice. Their loss is the lesson they needed. Your healing is the freedom you earned. And in that space between their regret and your rebirth, you finally understand that what once felt like rejection was really the path to your liberation. In the end, when the avoidant finally realizes what they've lost, it's no longer your burden to carry, it's their lesson to learn. You've walked through pain, confusion, and silence and turned it all into wisdom, peace, and power. You've grown from needing validation to embodying self-worth, from chasing love to becoming love itself. So, thank you for listening, for choosing healing over holding on, and for remembering that real strength isn't found in being chosen, it's found in choosing yourself.